Live. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Malaika Writes channel. My name is Malaika Writes, and today we're just going to go over some of the comments you guys have left and some of the things that I think might be helpful for my audience. Because as I've been going through the comments on my channel and just generally sort of looking at what you guys are sending to me in terms of DMs and stuff like that, I've realized that there is a sort of gap in terms of writing certain characters. A lot of my audience, you tend to be a little bit more creative. So maybe you're working on your own book, or you're working on your own comic, or you're working on something creative. And what draws you to a lot of my videos, especially the masculinity and femininity ones, the segue into that tends to be characters from a book that we all love, or from some kind of TV show, Rings of Power being the most recent one that I covered. So I just wanted to cover some common pitfalls in terms of writing certain characters, because I think sometimes when people send me things to read, one of the first things I notice is the way that certain genders are written is can be a bit odd, can feel a bit unnatural, um, can just feel, quite rigid in terms of how these characters are written, almost as if you're following a formula. Um, so I just wanted to talk about the pitfalls and sort of just bring in shows and books that we are all familiar with. Hi, Squid Bear. Um, so yeah, writing characters of the opposite gender. So this little bit alone could take up the entire life. Like just writing characters of the female or male gender can take up the entire life, because I think it encompasses so much. And when we're writing stories with characters, um, even though we don't tend to like the woke ideology, when you're writing a character who has a certain set of circumstances that they're coming from, you have to open yourself up to writing about a lot of people's expression of gender, because for that character it says something about them. But for simplicity's sake, we're just going to stick with the two that most of us are familiar with. So that's male and female, so writing about different the two genders. Um so these are things I want to talk about when you are, let's say you're a guy, as most of my audience is, but let's say you're a guy and you're writing about a woman. I've noticed that there are a lot of pitfalls that come with writing about the opposite gender, and women definitely fall into some of these traps. So it's not just men. Men tend to just generally have the more hilarious ones, though. But everybody falls into these pitfalls. And so, just to start off, I think the most basic thing to remember when you are writing any character is that your character is going to be fundamentally human. Now, you could be writing about a dog, you could be writing about an alien, but in order for your very human audience who will be paying for your book to relate to the character that you're writing, you're going to need to give them something fundamentally human. And since we're talking about male and female, I'm going to stick with humans. But generally, for characters, remember that your character is fundamentally human. They need to have things that normal humans would have, and you need to kind of know generally how human beings react to certain things. So there are studies you can read about how humans react to certain stimuli, um, and that's not separated into gender, because what you'll find is that the similarities between men and women are actually a lot, that the differences are very small in terms of how we react to certain things. We have a general way of reacting to certain stimuli. So when you're writing a character, just remember that just because this character is not the gender that you are, does not mean that this character suddenly reacts in a way that doesn't make sense and doesn't logic, it's not like the logical conclusion of what a human being would do. So I think that's the first thing to remember, is that your character is fundamentally human, and so humans have a general sort of way that they react to things. And so it would be a good practice as a writer for you to just learn how humans react to different things. It's like if a human sees a tiger coming at them, regardless of male and or female, they're going to have a certain type of reaction to that. The woman is not suddenly just going to go faint on the floor. Like, generally, both genders have fight or flight. So it would just make sense for your character to book it and run. Okay, so I think when you have that in mind, you're gonna, you know, avoid a lot of the pitfalls that I have seen in books where it becomes very obvious by how the female character reacts to things that this was written by a man, because no woman does this. Literally no woman does this, and you can just tell, you can tell that a man wrote this. But I'm trying to help you guys avoid those pitfalls, because we laugh about them, but it's very bad writing. And so the second sort of pitfall I wanted to talk about is that people are actually shaped more by circumstances than they are by their biology. So a lot of the times we try and look at the biological factors and hi Callum. We try and look at the biological factors, and we sort of try and say that, okay, because of biology, people will do this. Because men have more testosterone, they will behave like this. And because women have less, they'll behave like this. But rather, people are shaped by the circumstances that they grew up in. So it is more common to see women do more active work outside of the home in certain countries than it is in other countries. Why? Because of the circumstances in which they were brought up in. So if you see a country girl, for example, picking up a hay bale, you're not going to go, oh, that's quite masculine. It's like, but she grew up on a farm. What's she supposed to do? So it's circumstance that actually dictate how your character is going to behave towards certain stimuli. If you have a man who has never seen a bear and a woman who grew up in bear country, the woman is going to have more knowledge about how to deal with bear attacks, whereas the man is just going to be like, "Oop, it looks scary, probably going to run away." So it's not a matter of like gender in that circumstance. It is just who has the know-how, circumstances, and things like that. So it's circumstance that dictates how your character is going to behave. The backstory you give them. How did they grow up? How were they raised? What did their parents tell them growing up? What did their friends say growing up? How do these people or characters feel about themselves? Are they competent? Are they not competent? Are they stronger than most because of the circumstances that they grew up in? All of these things sort of combine to basically make up your character. And so if the backstory, because this is what I see a lot of the time, is that the backstory for a particular character is one way, but their behavior is completely different. For example, you can have a female character who grew up in very strenuous circumstances, but she faints every time there is like a problem. So the question is, how did she survive long enough for the story to begin? How is she still alive? Because if she's literally had no one to look after her, she's been on her own, she's this tough, bad person. But then as soon as the conflict happens, she starts crying. It's like, how does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. So I think it's one of those pitfalls that a lot of people fall into, where they have an idea of the character, but in order to just sort of balance out the either blatant misogyny or just balance out whatever they want to balance out, they just give the character a completely different way of acting that's completely different to their backstory. So Callum says people can still choose their character, right? So the thing is, if you are are you talking about that in the storybook sense, or talking about that in like real life where people can still choose how they wish to behave? Because yes, people can choose how they want to turn out. However, your choices are largely informed on the information that you have available to you. And so if you don't have the information that there is another way to be outside of what you've grew up with, you're likely going to follow the beaten path. until you're exposed to something else, which is why in storybooks we have, or the archetypal sort of myth, there is always a period of normality, in which your hero or your heroine is basically just like everyone else. And then there is a sort of disrupting action that brings this new thing into their normal, and they either choose to forsake this thing or they choose to follow it, in which case they learn something else and become new people. So Frodo is pretty much like every other hobbit in a sense. Bilbo says that he's still in love with the Shire and the little rivers and everything else. He's still a normal hobbit. Yeah, they think that he's one of the best, but who doesn't think their nephew is the best? So he's still a regular hobbit. But at the end of the journey, at the end of the trilogy, he's so changed that he cannot remain in the Shire. So if he had chosen like Fadiga Bolger to remain in the Shire, he wouldn't have gone through all that change. And he would have remained Frodo Baggins and not Frodo Baggins, who the destroyer of the ring. So your character's circumstances will impact their choices more than their biology, which is what the point I'm trying to make. That's the second thing. And I think that's so important to remember, because I've read too many books where the character's biology is more important than their backstory. And it's like, that's completely wrong. I don't care if your character was born with a limp. Like, if your character grew up in hard circumstances where they had to be strong, they're going to be strong regardless of their disability. It's like in Vikings, I don't know if anyone's watched that series, Vikings with Ragnar Lothbrok. He has a son called Ivar. Ivar is a cripple, but Ivar turns out to be one of the most bloodthirsty Vikings in the entire series. Why? Because of his circumstance. You either get stronger or you die. So he had no choice. He didn't like grow up in a cushy environment where he was able to just, be a cripple and that was it. He had to become stronger in order to survive, in order to excel, in order to live up to the legacy of being the son of Ragnar Lothbrok. So that circumstance shapes the character and not their biology. Their biology is that Ivor is a cripple, is that his legs don't work, is that a lot of things don't work. But the reality of his circumstances is that he has to be more than his biology in order to pull the story in the way that he does. So I hope that's, getting through and everybody sort of getting that, because I think it's such an important thing to stress. When we look at Galadriel, for example, in the Rings of Power series, she's a character that I think could have really succeeded if more things had been done to show the backstory. Galadriel's backstory, first of all, Galadriel as a character in the Rings of Power, so we're taking her away from the Tolkien story. Galadriel as a character in the Rings of Power series, I think she could have worked as a character, because women taking on a very masculine storyline or very masculine sort of frame within a story, archetypally, is not new and can be done well. There are good examples of that. However, not enough was done to earn the payoff that is Galadriel as we are introduced to her. So we get this backstory, but it is not enough to justify what we are left with at the beginning of the series. Galadriel is not made a likable character, and the writers should have realized that you're not taking a fresh character out of nowhere. You're taking a character with history. So this character is coming from a beloved franchise, and you're significantly changing their behavior. So everyone already knows the backstory of this character that you've taken, but you are significantly changing that and making them almost new. So you're kind of doing an uphill battle here. But they could have made it work if they had given us enough backstory for this new Galadriel. But because they were just trying to do a cheap sort of cop out, they didn't do enough work, and they thought just the love of the character would suffice. But the thing is, this person isn't the person we love. This is a whole new, brand new person. Sure, she's blonde, but she's not the same person. You could have put her in a Party City wig and we wouldn't have been fooled. Like, no one, who is this person? We don't know her. So you have to introduce her to us in a way that we will like her, root for her, and become emotionally attached to her story, therefore making everything she does have significance to the audience. They didn't do that, and that's why the character flopped. It's not that she was the worst written character in history. The series as a whole suffered from it. It's not that the actress was the worst actress to ever step on screen. She was not. There were just a lot of things wrong with that series. And because she was not introduced in a way that made her likable and made us emotionally attached to the character, we didn't care and we didn't like her because, again, she's being pitted against this sort of nostalgic figure of Kate Blanchett's Galadriel. So it was never going to work with the way that they did it. But I honestly think that just with a bit better writing, the show could have worked a bit better. I don't think it would have been perfect because I think the angle they chose to come out of having multiple storylines interweaving just didn't work for the type of story that they were trying to tell. If you look at the Peter Jackson series, it starts off with someone we're supposed to care about, one character. So the audience doesn't exhaust emotional energy on several different storylines. We zero in on this one beloved people, the hobbits. And we zero in on a few characters that we're supposed to love. And through these few characters, we are introduced to the rest of the cast. Now, Rings of Power begins with everybody. And so there's a lot of storylines to latch onto, a lot of people to potentially like, and not enough about them to have emotional ties to them. There was too much going on as well as not enough going on, which is a conundrum of a problem to have. So Callum says, but Malika, they have Tom Bombadil now. Yeah, that one was so I can't lie. Yeah. That's what it provoked in me, a cough. I'm sorry for the audio listeners because that is such a plosive sound, but yeah, Tom Bombadil is a very interesting character and a very some way choice. I'm sorry, there's no other way to say it. It's so I don't understand why they would bring him in because he has not been mentioned. He is not relevant to the plot in any way. Why would they bring him in? What do we need to see from Tom Bombadil that adds to the current plot? The thing is, this is the thing. Even without the story that we know and love, the plot of the Rings of Power as it stands currently has nothing to do with Tom Bombadil. He adds nothing. He is insignificant to the current plot. So why is he being added? Except for just a cash grab or to just reel people in, or here's the newest party trick that we've pulled out of our hat to reel people in because we know that the current plot line is not enough to reel people in. Hi, double A. But it's very confusing and it's also quite frustrating because there is so much to do in terms of repairing the damaging reputation of season 1. To add Tom Bombadil doesn't make season 2 sound any better. Instead, it sounds like this is just going to be a mess. And the worrying thing is that the Wheel of Time, which was supposed to be Amazon's like next best series, did not do great. I heard a lot of reviews, even from the people who were just the most enthusiastic about Wheel of Time, and they did not have good reviews of it. So why is Amazon not hiring better writers? I don't, because it's not like the writers are in short supply. There are good writers. There are people even on YouTube making up better storylines with the current plot material. So what's going on? But anyway, I don't pretend to know what's going on in Jeff Bezos's mind. Callum says, but Malika, Halbrand has a wig on, so he's definitely Sauron. I mean, I don't really know what to say to that, because I think with the Rings of Power, it had a lot of factors about it that were good. I think visually the entire project is rather stunning. I think they did a good job of separating it from the Peter Jackson series by making it very clean. Some people may not have liked that, but I think it was not as terrible of a decision to make, especially if you're trying to separate yourself from a very well-known franchise. I also think that the CGI, terrible. However, you can look past it. There are certain times where I'm just like, okay. But, you know, if you squint, you can look past it. And we're not here to nitpick, because this is not a good enough series to nitpick. There are glaring problems. We don't need to be nitpicking. We can just attack the glaring problems. I think characterization is also an issue for this show, because they have decent characters, introduce them at the wrong times. They don't give us enough. So sit-ins for Synth. Love your videos. Thank you so much for that. But they don't do, the Rings of Power does not do a good job of introducing its characters. The love story between Bronwyn and, is it Hardir or whatever the other elf's name is? Trash it. Trash it. I don't care for it. I don't care about any of them. Like, just, it's irrelevant. Why do we need to see it? They don't have, is it me that just feels like they don't really have chemistry? What is it about this couple that I'm supposed to love? She's just an average female character. She didn't need to be in the plot, but okay, fine, we have her in the plot. Their romance, what are the stakes of their romance, honestly? Like what are the stakes of their romance? Because that's the thing that I wanted to even touch on in terms of characterization, because we're going to get back to this list. I know that you guys really love chatting about Lord of the Rings, but we're going to get back to this list. But there are no stakes in Bronwyn and Haldir's relationship. There are no stakes. As in, they could end up together and it would not change a thing. They cannot end up together and it would not change a thing. Because Haldir is just a normal elf. He's a soldier. If he died, it wouldn't change a thing. If she died, it wouldn't change a thing. So what is the point of all of these romances? If either of them die, or if they even die together, they're literally a drop in the ocean of things happening. So why should I care? They're not even important to each other, other than the fact that they like each other. You know, so they're not important to the plot, point blank. Because despite the fact, this is why they're not even important to the plot, they failed to stop the thing, the climax from happening. They failed to stop the climax from happening. The volcano goes off and Mordor is created. So even if they had not existed, what happened would have still happened. So what was the point of them being there? If you notice, with the Lord of the Rings, the characters are extremely important because the stakes are high, and yet they prevent the bad things from happening, meaning that without them there, bad things would have happened, but their presence prevents those things from happening. So but they still make minor mistakes. For example, in the inn, very early on in the fellowship, Frodo still slips on the ring. But the significance of Aragorn there is that he is able to help them avoid the Nazgul for an extended amount of time. They still encounter the Nazgul after a certain point, but Aragorn's presence creates a distance in time between this meeting. Why? Because he's important. It's not just for us to go tramping through the countryside. It's to establish that Aragorn is an important character with skills that are necessary to the plot. So what was the point of Haldir if at every single point he fails to do a bunch of things? He fails to stop the invasion. He fails to rescue his teammates. He fails in everything except potentially protecting the woman he loves. But that's not his job because she seems to be very competent. So what's his point? You see what I mean? Your character needs to have a point. If they're competent, let them prevent something. He doesn't prevent a thing. So I'm just going to go to the comments now. So, okay. I liked the role of Ada, the father of the orcs. Yeah, I think he was a decent character. You know, he was probably one of the better written characters in the whole series. They really seem to like his character because they put a lot of thought into him. Callum says, yep, Tolkien is a master storyteller and this lady knows her Tolkien law. I try. I don't know everything, but you know, I try. Hello, love your channel. It's brilliant. Glad I could tune into this. Oh, thank you, Domza. I think that's how you say your name. Is that how you say your name? Great. Callum. Let's see. Double A says, glad to make it to the stream. Glad you're here too. Callum says, Pippin exposes Frodo. Hobbits make nice crispy bacon, and the hobbits keep making mistakes, yet they learn from them as heroes. Yes. So the hobbits, and this is the good characterization in Tolkien's story, is that the hobbits have no special skills. So naturally, as a result of them not having special skills, they make rookie mistakes. And that makes sense. You see how what we were talking about earlier, that circumstance is more important to the characterization of your character than their biology. So the hobbits make rookie mistakes because they are hobbits with a certain set of circumstances. They have never had any hard labor. They have never had any significant troubles that would make these set of hobbits experienced travelers. So for that reason, they make mistakes. Barlam and Butterbear, the owner of the inn, even remarks that it's almost as if the hobbits are on holiday because they need such looking after. Why? This is the first time they've been on a journey like this. They cannot be expected to have the experience of Aragorn, and that's where he comes in. So because of the gap in knowledge that the hobbits have, Aragorn is the perfect character to slot into that place. And because of his skill, we are able to see why he is needed as a character. We're able to see his significance. He keeps these lovable characters that we've come to know alive, and therefore we like him as well. He's introduced to us in a dubious sort of way. Frodo's not very sure about him, but as we learn more about him, we like him. And then he also keeps our favorite characters safe. And so everything about him affirms the fact that we're supposed to like him. His usefulness, his knowledge of elven lore, you know, his wit, everything about him sort of affirms this likability. And so that's good writing, that's good characterization. Despite the fact that his introduction was mysterious, it's quickly remedied so that we don't sit not liking this character that we're supposed to like for too long. So that's one of the things about good writing, is that you know when to throw in the towel and be like, no, sorry, you're supposed to like this character. Yeah, the mystery has gone on long enough. With Galadriel, yes, big, bad, buff, killing monsters, do what you need to do. They needed to throw in that towel way sooner. they needed to give us a lot of backstory, especially because this series is reframing a character that is already well known. So Double A says, I gotta be honest, I watched The Rings of Power when it came out, but I can't contribute to this discussion because it was so bad that I can't remember any of this. The Rings of Power as a series, on its own, divorced from everything, is not the worst series to ever be created, you know, but given its context, and then also just viewing the series objectively, because I did try to be objective and not just like give my bias, because I am a Tolkien fan, and so there is a bias there, but I did try to sort of remove that and be like, okay, let me watch this as a series, let me watch this as something divorced. The problem with doing that is that there were a lot of references that you will not understand unless you have read or watched Tolkien before. So it was disappointing in that sense because it demands for you to be a fan and then also slaps the fact that you're a fan in your face. It also slaps you in the face because you're a fan, but it demands that you're a fan, because if you're not a fan, you won't get certain references. So it was a very disappointing watch for a fan. As a newbie who's just kind of watching it, it wasn't the worst thing to watch, but it's forgettable. It because it has no emotional pull. And this is another thing bringing us back to that list that we were talking about. Back to that little everything. Squid Bear says, one comment I don't like from YouTube is that Boromir is the most human character. Callum is right. I have covered that topic, but I will talk about that a little bit, because one thing I am planning to do is sort of revisit some of my older videos and kind of give my year later sort of review of them. Not much has changed in terms of my ideas, but maybe we'll just see. We'll see. But yeah, like I was saying, emotion is one of the most important things about a story. Reason being, you need people to read it and you need people to emotionally connect to it in order for that story to last in their hearts, in order for them to remember it. The lack of emotional connection between the audience and Rings of Power is one of the things that made it a failure. Because it did not grasp the audience emotionally, its mistakes couldn't be looked over. You see, one of the things that I love from the Bible is that love covers a multitude of sins. And that is so true, because when we are watching the series, if you're in love with a series, there are a bunch of things that you will just sort of overlook because generally you're in love with the series. No one was in love with Rings of Power, and so all its mistakes were just glaring, which is something you don't want for a series, because there are bound to be mistakes. Even in the Peter Jackson trilogy, there are mistakes, but you love it because it grips you emotionally, and it does that with a formula. It's not like it cast a spell over you, which is the frustration, because it's not like Tolkien is the best writer to have ever written. No, he's not. He's a good writer, a great writer, but it can be replicated, you know? His genius can be replicated. He's not the only one who's written a fantastic story in the history of stories. So he didn't, as my mom likes to say, he didn't have two heads, you know? He didn't have horns on his head that gave him this mystical ability to write a good story. So it can be replicated. There is a formula to writing a good story. And it takes, yes, practice with the formula, but generally there is a formula to write a good story. And that is emotion, entertainment. You prioritize entertainment. You prioritize the emotional connection between the audience and the story. And when you don't do that, what you have is just something that will never really like stand the test of time, which is frustrating because there's good material there. It's obviously based on the Second Age, so obviously we know there's good material there. But even within the Rings of Power itself, there's good material there. But because it's handled so badly, it's hard to see what could have been good and what could have been made good out of the mess that was there. So let's go to the comments. Because I've seen a few paragraphs there, guys. Squidbear says they had check marks for every cherry picked out of the Silmarillion. Callum says the Rings of Power showrunners adapted vague notions of the Second Age and then inserted their coping fan fiction. You see, the Second Age was always going to be difficult to adapt because the Second Age of Tolkien's in the Silmarillion is vague. It is where it is. The Second Age is vague. There's a lot in the Second Age that is just sort of written in a paragraph. Years skip by within the same paragraph. It is what it is. They were going to have a difficult time of it. However, it didn't need to be as bad as it is. I already knew it was going to be difficult because because of the nature of the Second Age. So I don't think I can criticize them on that particular point just because the Second Age is vague. However, it didn't need to be this difficult. It didn't need to be this bad. We were already accepting of time jumps and like sort of squashing down events to make characters live for a certain amount of time. We were okay with that because we knew it was not feasible to do it any other way. We couldn't just sit here for like 12 seasons to get from one point to the next. Entertainment is the aim of the game, and so certain things needed to be changed. I don't think any sensible person had an issue with that. And I say sensible because, you know, some people did. But what is more egregious and what is more frustrating is the general writing. Like Callum said, their own sort of fan fiction of what should have been. And even the sentence, which is quite a prideful, egotistical sentence, is we're going to write the story Tolkien didn't write. It's like, I couldn't be the author of a text and have somebody said, I'm going to write the novel you didn't write. You're gonna do you're gonna do what? You're gonna do him? Because how egotistical do you have to be to say I'm gonna write the novel you didn't write? So you're gonna take my name, my novel, my creative, my everything, and you're gonna tell me that I'm going to write the novel you didn't write. You're going to stand on my shoulders and tell me that I'm going to write the novel you didn't write. Wow, audacity it must be sold in buckets, because when I heard that, I said, "Wow, wow, the spirit of humility is not here." Okay, so Callum asks, how would you advise getting audiences to love your story with first impressions? What do you tell your audience first? It's there in your question. First impressions. What does your audience see first? In The Lord of the Rings, we are introduced to a very merry scene, to a scene that is lovable, to a scene that is warm. It sets the tone. It brings us into this world so that we have something to look at. The very first thing we see is something that is easy to love. And therefore, because we are coming to a book, remember, you are coming to the book. You want to read the book already. And so the author is already starting from a favorable place because the audience wants to read this thing. They want to watch this thing. But you as the author now have a decision to make. What is the first thing you introduce? Because the first character you introduce is the first person that we will emotionally latch onto. And so if you don't want us to emotionally latch onto the villain, don't show us the villain in a favorable light first. Don't make them the first person we see. Don't make them likable in the first instance. Don't give us their perspective so that we can see their point. Whose ever point you want us to see, whose ever perspective you want us to get, show us that first. Let that be the first impression of your book. Because if we see the character that you want us to hate first, it doesn't matter how much you villainize them, we're gonna end up liking them because they were our introduction to the book. They were our gateway into this story. We're gonna have some sort of, we're gonna spend the book really trying to justify half of the actions that you're showing us, because that's just how humans are. We like to justify, we like to lie for people. So when you show us somebody, let that first person be who you want us to love. And if this character is gonna do a 180 like Galadriel, then take your time showing us all the good things about them. Let the first scene let the first scene not be her abandoning her comrades in the snow and having to be called back to save their life. Because what kind of impression is that? Let us linger in the glory of Valinor when Galadriel was likable. And then you can bring us to current Galadriel, who's a bit more hardened and a bit more wicked, because then we have something to latch onto. We liked her. Oh, we want to see how our beloved character got to this point. But give us something to latch onto first. Squidbear says, it's almost like the Rings of Power was seen as only a cheesy fairy tale that was too much for Disney to adapt. I don't think anyone sees The Lord of the Rings as sort of like a cheesy fairy tale. Anyone who maybe hasn't read the books or has, even if you haven't read the books, just the cultural impact of the movies alone would have told you that you were dealing with a beast. Even if you didn't really want to look at the story, like maybe it wasn't your cup of tea, but financially alone, it's a beast. So I think the incentive is not necessarily that it was a cheesy fairy tale. It was more so, how do we milk the cow? And how do we do that in a way that is points back at us? How do we milk the cow in a way that points back at our prowess rather than Tolkien? And it's a very egotistical thing to do because it's not your work. You're adapting it. So make an adaptation that is faithful to the person who sacrificed years of their life to do that. But anyway, we won't talk about the pride of people here. If I recall correctly, Tolkien refused a Disney adaptation of his work. The closest we'll get is the Ralph Bakshi version. So Ben Tolkas, oh, I see what you did there with Tolkas. Love covers a multitude of sins. The Jackson trilogy has sins in its adaptation, but there was enough love of the source material to cover them. The same cannot be said for Rings of Power. I agree completely. Yeah. Gimli's portrayal was a great example, but Thorin from Jackson's Hobbit was pretty good in execution. Yeah, I think Thorin in Peter Jackson's adaptation is a very good example of a character who is not necessarily the most likable, but enough is given about him for us to like him anyway. If you read the books, if you read The Hobbit, because it's not the books, it's book. When you read The Hobbit, Thorin is a derriere, to put that politely. If you guys know what that word means, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Thorin is, yeah. If Thorin, all I'm saying is that if Thorin came to if book Thorin came to my house with that attitude, yeah. But in the film adaptation, we are made to understand why he behaves that way. And because we understand why, he becomes likable. Second, Thorin is introduced as a grand figure. He's not just introduced as this grumpy, angsty, annoying derriere. He's got a grand introduction. This is a person of importance. He's held in high regard by his men, and the music helps, you know. He's also got this appearance about him. The way he enters, the way he treats the other dwarfs. So we see that he's not a horrible person. He's got an attitude, but he's not a horrible person. Now, let's go to Galadriel. Galadriel deserts one of her own people. So what does that tell us about her? She could have been grumpy. She could have been mad. But deserting your soldiers, it's giving disloyal, and nobody likes a disloyal person. So despite the fact, and there is something to be said about the fact that when male characters act a certain way, they're given a certain amount of leniency, and when female characters act a certain way, they're given less leniency. I think that there is something to be said about that, because I've seen enough of that trend to realize that there is some validity to that claim. However, in this case, that is not the case. There are certain actions that spell certain consequences. Having a mood is something both characters can have, and certain people watching it will attribute more sympathy towards one gender or the other. Okay. But disloyalty is something that nobody likes. So if you make your female character disloyal, it doesn't matter if both of them had a mood. One of them is disloyal. One of them has a vice that nobody likes. So why should we like your character? Why should we root for this disloyal person who is willing to abandon somebody else? Who is willing to sacrifice somebody else's life? Someone who is in their care, who is under their command. Whereas Thorin runs back into the fire for someone else. For someone that he's not even fond of. You know, he's willing to save Bilbo's life. Even though he says Bilbo shouldn't have come and he should have stayed in his own home, he saves his life more than once. And so that's the difference. If you want to make your character a derriere but still make them likable, you've got to decide the virtues that you're going to show, and you've got to show them regularly. They can't be spaced out like halfway through the book. Like, you've got to show them regularly enough to remind us of these things to counteract the derriere-like behavior. Squid Bear says, Thorin, to me, is the Aragorn of the Hobbit trilogy. Why? Why? Why do you say that? Because I completely disagree. Like, I don't know if you could tell, but I completely disagree. But to you, maybe. So, they are just fundamentally such different characters with such different circumstances and such different trials. I don't know. What angle are you coming at with that one? Is it like that they're both sort of leaders? Is it, I'm really trying to think of a connection here that I would use to compare the two of them. Is it, I don't know, what is it? Try and explain that to me, because I really don't get it. Double A, I'm looking forward to the Malaika Legendarium. Ah, okay, well, you know, shameless little plug here. I am actually writing something. So it's called The Children of Hammerhand. And, you know, it's just about this particular family and the trials that they face. So, you know, we'll see what becomes of that. But yeah, guys, I'm uploading chapters of that onto Patreon, so check it out. It's under Malaika Writes. Same as every little thing I do. Everything is under Malaika Writes. So Squidbear says, I guess from an archetypal role. Do Thorin and Aragorn both play the same archetypal role? Okay, I could see where you're making that comparison. Double A, it's definitely Malaika Writes. I don't think I have anything under Madam Scribbles. Yeah, so definitely Malaika Writes. But yeah, back to Squid Bear. I guess I see your point a little bit more now. If we're just going archetypes in terms of the roles that they both weave in and out of. So okay, yeah, from that point of view, vaguely I could see it. Though I wouldn't say that that Thorin and Aragorn, like Thorin is the Aragorn of that series, even from an archetypal standpoint, because that severely messes with the story. You see, the thing is, when we're comparing characters, it's very hard to say that this character is this character of this series, just because, especially when they're in the same universe, um, just because it takes away from what that character is individually, like what that character brings, the perspective that they have, and what they're written to do. So, um, Squidbear says of the burdened king. Yeah, they both kind of have that. They both kind of have that same thing. Yeah, they kind of. Yeah, they both have that sort of burden of kingship. They both wrestle with it. Yeah, so I guess from that perspective, it's a struggle that they both have. Yeah, I could see where you're drawing that perspective from. Yeah, a bit abstract in my opinion, but yeah, yeah, I think it could work. Like if you had to write an essay on it, I think there's a bit there that you could, I don't know, squeeze a couple of paragraphs out of. That's very teacher speak. That's very teacher speak, where I just sort of measure everything in essays and how many marks and paragraphs you could get out of an answer like that. Um, Double A said Bard is more of an Aragorn. Now that is a comparison I could get behind. Yeah, I could get behind that comparison because I do, even in the styling of the two, I think that there is a stronger comparison between those two, because and that's just from a character perspective. Archetypes, a bunch of characters fit into particular archetypes, but in terms of characterization and characteristics that are unique to both of those characters, I think there is a stronger comparison between the two. Um, Especially because Bard is also that sort of like leader without really, wanting to stick his foot into the leadership role and everything like that. Whereas Thorin's conflict is not the burden of kingship. Thorin's conflict is greed, you know? And so yes, the burden of kingship can be sort of inferred that maybe the gold is like a burden and all that stuff and the Arkenstone, but really what it is greed. That's the burden. It's not the burden of responsibility of kingship, which is a different thing altogether. Um, but again, this is from the movie perspective, because in the books, Aragorn isn't sort of shying away from the responsibility of kingship, because he knows that's the only way that he'll be able to marry Arwen is if he becomes king. That's sort of Elrond's condition for that marriage to take place. So he's not as reluctant to become king in the books as he is in the novels. So there is something to be said about that. Bard is mentioned a lot less in the Hobbit books. Thorin's greed is really the center, because when we look at Thorin, the portrayal of Thorin in the movies and the portrayal of Thorin in the books, it's two different characters, really. Like they have similarities, but to be honest, the comparison between Aragorn and Thorin, it only exists if we're talking about book. If we're talking about movie Aragorn and movie Thorin. because there is no similarity between them if we're talking about Book Aragorn and Book Thorin. Squid Bear says, okay, here's a better idea. What would I think? Or if Smaug survived all the way into the war for the ring in the Third Age? It would significantly change the plot in a number of ways. First of all, it would significantly reduce the competency of Gandalf and his planning. We know that Gandalf is a bit of a meddler because the reason why he encourages the dwarves to go back to the mountain is specifically to get rid of Smaug. That is Gandalf's end game. And so, in that sense, we know he's a bit of a meddler. So, if Smaug isn't dispatched in the Battle of Five Armies, then we have a very big problem because it reduces the competency of a very significant character. It also means that Sauron has a weapon in his arsenal because he can just promise Smaug a bunch of stuff. So he has a very big weapon and it could possibly change the outcome of the entire war. Thirdly, Bilbo becomes very irrelevant. And also, Gollum possibly doesn't ever lose the ring because in order for Bilbo to defeat Smaug, he had to have had the ring. So we're working with the proposal that possibly if Smaug survives, he kills Bilbo and kills the dwarves. So we don't have Frodo being the heir of Bilbo. Frodo never comes in contact with the ring. Gollum possibly never leaves the mountain. Sauron gets strong, maybe summons Gollum through the summons and all that. Gollum probably will resist until he can't anymore. The ring leaves Gollum, finds its way back to Sauron, and everything ends. Yeah, pretty much. So I think when we're sort of looking at such a big plot point like Smaug, he seems a bit removed because he is in an entirely different book, but his significance, his death specifically, is very significant because a lot of things are tied to it. One thing I dislike, this is double A say, one thing I dislike in the Lord of the Ring films is when Theoden says to Eowyn he's an honorable man, as if Eowyn and Aragorn are engaged or something. That whole romance annoys me. Okay, so Theoden is not saying that as if they're engaged. He's saying that your choice in Aragorn is a good choice. So he's not saying that they're engaged. He doesn't think they're engaged at all. But he knows Eowyn likes Aragorn. And he's acknowledging that this is a good choice because Aragorn is an honorable man. So he's praising Eowyn's ability to choose a good person because his son, who Eowyn was supposed to marry, is dead. So she's available. There is no romance between Aragorn and Eowyn, and that's pretty clear. She likes him, and he likes her as a person, not as a romantic potential, and which is why he tells her that you is a shadow of a thought that you love. I actually don't like you like that, bro. But he doesn't say those words, but you know, but he's essentially making it clear that he doesn't like her. There is no romance between the two. And Theoden is not saying that they're engaged or anything like that. He is praising Eowyn's ability to choose. And I personally think it's a sensible romance to have because Aragorn is a good choice. Look. If I was Theoden and my newly unbetrothed due to my son's death niece is eyeing up Aragorn, I would dap her up too. That's all that he's an honorable man means. It's just a dap up, like, I see you and I approve. That's all it is. So it's not like Theoden is saying, oh, congratulations on your engagement. He's like, I see where your eyes are going, and you got good eyes. So I personally liked it because I can't lie, Aragorn is a catch. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? Like, it made sense. The thing is, the storyline made sense. Eowyn is a girl who has sort of been told her whole life that she has a particular role to play, and she has these ambitions to play another role and to do more and to fight for the things that she loves and believes in. Aragorn comes along, quite a looker, a competent man who is seen as a good, honorable example by other men, including her own family members. He's part of the group that saves her uncle from the enchantment he's under. So she already reveres him in that sense. And then he also sort of affirms what she feels about herself. So why wouldn't she like him? It makes sense for her to like him. And, but I like the way they handled it because he's kind to her. He fosters that fierceness in her, that belief in herself. He fosters it, and he's gentle towards her because Aragorn, that's who he is. So it's not out of character for him. And then it ends in a way that is in character for both of them. So it's a very well written sort of thing that they had going on there, and I loved it personally because I think it works. I think we established why it's so important that Bilbo found the ring. Yep. And would make Frodo's strife in the end matter because of the first story, The Hobbit. Yeah. Double A says Eowyn was supposed to marry Theodred, aren't they cousins? Yeah. That's one thing you'll discover in a lot of, history, is that people generally married whoever was around. Commoners didn't have to as much, but whenever you have royalty or people with titles, yeah, you're probably going to end up marrying your cousin. Our own late queen was cousins with her husband, Prince Philip. So yeah, we still even have modern examples. A lot of European royalty married their cousins because Queen Victoria is sort of the grandmother of Europe because a lot of her grandchildren ended up marrying other European royals, and they ended up marrying each other again. So generally, yeah, and that's why you had a lot of blood diseases in the royal family. Okay, so Squid Bear, okay. Ashlyn D says, "Hey Malika, chatting about Eowyn. Sounds like I hopped up on the wrong time." Yes, you did, because we were just having a great old chat about her. And she's one of those characters that I think was done so well in the Peter Jackson adaptation. Honestly, she is so good in the adaptation. Her emotions, her fire, everything about her, even the villain that she takes down and how she takes him down, and what she goes through after, and even how Aragorn takes care of her, especially if you've watched the extended edition. I don't know about you theatrical release people, but in the extended edition he heals her wounds, and that's such a lovely moment between the two of them, and it shows that there's no hard feelings as well. Double A says Eowyn should have gone with Grimmer. Could have helped bring him back to the light. Grimmer did have a crush on Eowyn, right? Okay. Beautiful. Double A, I love that you brought that up because it brings us into a topic that I would like to discuss. So settle in, boys, and girls, because we have a topic right here. So first of all, let's answer the question, because before I go off, let's just answer the question. So let's answer the fact that no, the answer to that question is no. That Eowyn should not have gone with Grimmer. Excuse me? No. No. First of all, if she had married Grimmer, that would have given him more of a standing in court, meaning he would have had more legitimate reason to influence her uncle, further strengthening Saruman's hold on Theoden. That's a terrible idea. So, first of all, no, just right there. And then, second of all, as Ashlyn D says, good girl saving the bad boy trope almost never works in real life. That, I can, beautiful. Yeah, that's the second point. It is never, ever, I hope you can see how much I'm stressing it, because get this. It is never a woman's job to save a man. It is never, ever a woman's job to rescue a man from his bad behavior and bad decisions, in books or in real life. Ever. This whole thing of she could have brought him to the light. Jesus will bring you to the light, not Eowyn. Eowyn's marrying him would have only enabled his bad behavior. The thing of, and this is where I fundamentally agree with Jordan Peterson's reading of Beauty and the Beast, because it is not the job of anybody to find any beast to tame. Human beings are not beasts. You tame yourself. You know, your ethos, your value system tames you. What you choose to live your life by tames you, not another person. Relying on another person to tame you is a recipe for disaster. Relying on another person to tell you how to behave, except they are your parents are the only people who should be taming you. They are the only people whose responsibility it is, and they are the only people who have the tools to do it. Because they get you when you're a child and you're moldable. When you're an adult and some human woman is supposed to step into your life, or some human man is supposed to step into your life, it is not their job at all to teach you the behavior that is needed to exist in society. That is your job. And so when we have this trope of the good girl, you know, saving the bad boy or teaching him how to live in society, that is absolute trash, because that doesn't work. It doesn't work. It exists because people think they can do it, but it doesn't work. It leads to heartache. It leads to abusive situations, because anytime you misuse something, you are abusing it. And so misusing an institution or misusing a circumstance or relationship is inherently abuse. So Double A says a wife can fix her husband's faults. No, she can't. A husband can fix a husband's faults. A wife can fix a wife's faults. Having a partner can help you fix yourself. It can help you see the things that you're doing wrong. When you're in partnership, when you're in community, people can call out certain things, but they cannot do the work to fix that, because they are not the ones doing it. You are the one doing it. So you must take accountability for your actions and do what needs to be done. You fix you. Your parents call out behaviors. Like when you're young, your parents say, this is bad, so don't do it again. If you want to return to your parents' good graces, you don't do it again. So when you're in relationship, there is no call for any person in that relationship to heal you. You heal yourself. You do the work. They can aid it. Aiding is not the same as doing the work. Encouragement is not the same as doing the work. That's what community is supposed to do. Double A says, I disagree completely. Faramir heals Eowyn and Eowyn heals Faramir. How? How? Aragorn physically heals Eowyn's hand. But how does Faramir heal Eowyn? And how does Eowyn heal Faramir? How? I'll wait. None of them heal each other. It is not the call of another person to heal you. That is your responsibility. You don't need to be in a relationship to be a whole person. You need community. They heal each other's broken hearts. Is that what was plaguing Eowyn and Faramir? A broken heart? Is after what specifically broke their hearts? So Eowyn, okay, let's let's take the argument and piece it up. So Eowyn has lost her uncle. We can say that she's dealing with loss. She's dealing with the loss of a loved one. Faramir has lost his brother. So they're both dealing with loss. They're both dealing with the loss of a loved one. Now, if you're saying that because they lost loved ones, that by finding each other, they healed each other of that hurt, then that would still be incorrect. Because that's not how healing works. You can have community around you that can soften the blow, but healing from the loss of a loved one is going through the grief process. Being in a relationship does not take away the fact that you've lost a loved one. Like, Faramir does not replace Theoden. He doesn't replace her uncle. Just like Eowyn does not replace Boromir. So they didn't help each other heal they didn't heal each other. Having company and having fellowship and having community around them could have helped soften the blow. But healing from a loss of a loved one or healing from something like that is not, they didn't heal each other. That would be the wrong terminology to use. Okay. Also, Grimmer was manipulated. He was a good man of Rohan who had a crush on Eowyn. Why are you saying Grimmer can't pursue Eowyn? Grimmer can't pursue Eowyn because whether or not he was manipulated, he was still an agent of evil. So just because you are manipulated, if you go on to manipulate somebody else, you're also a perpetrator. It doesn't matter whether you were manipulated. If you're doing something bad, you're also a bad person. That's just what it is. So it doesn't excuse you from the consequences of your actions. It doesn't excuse you from taking accountability for what you've done as well, just because you were manipulated. Because Graham knew what he was doing was wrong. Because if he was loyal to, and this is how we know he knew what he was doing was wrong. There were other people who also were in similar circumstances to him. There were like all the other people of Rohan. Eomer, for example, saw the king's decline. He could have listened to what Grimmer was saying, but he saw the lack of logic in it. He saw the inherent disloyalty to Rohan in it, and he refused to listen to Grimmer. So why couldn't Grimmer listen to the lack of loyalty that was coming out of Saruman's mouth and make the decision as a good man of Rohan? He didn't. He made a choice to manipulate the king of Rohan. He made a choice to aid Saruman in degrading the integrity of the throne of Rohan. That's a choice. So it doesn't matter whether he was manipulated. It doesn't matter whether Grimmer was manipulated. Him being with Eowyn would have further degraded the integrity of the throne of Rohan because he would have had more of a legitimate stance for which to manipulate the king. So there is no world in which a romance between Grimmer and Eowyn works. Also, are we forgetting the fact that Eowyn didn't like him? Even if he was a good man, she don't like you. You're not entitled to a woman's relationship because you're a good man. No. She did not like him. And that alone, regardless of anything else, is enough to disqualify the possibility of a relationship. Aragorn did not like Eowyn, and that alone is enough to disqualify the possibility of a relationship between Eowyn and Aragorn. It doesn't need to make sense. If the person doesn't like you, it's done. Pontius Pilate, wipe your hands clean, wash him. It's over. So it doesn't matter if it would have made sense or, Grimmer was a good man or he was manipulated. She didn't like him. Point blank, period. Aragorn did not like Eowyn. Point blank, period. That relationship wouldn't have worked. Grimmer was a bad man, manipulation or not, because he had a choice to make between the loyalty to the crown of Rohan and his own selfish ambitions, and he chose his selfish ambitions. So this ideology of like, oh, Eowyn could have healed him, that's not her job. That's no one's job. That's your job. Heal yourself. Do the work. Let your ethos guide you to self-healing. Like, and this is something that always makes me it's always very curious whenever I listen to like relationship gurus and stuff. Whenever I listen to just people talk about relationships and stuff like that, what is often missing is the fact that you are responsible for you. What do you believe in? Why has your belief not protected you from certain things? Why is it that your ethos is so weak that you have no self-discipline? Why is it that your ethos is so weak that somebody else who is not your parent, who is ordained to take care of you and to show you the right way, why is it that the ethos your parents have given you, the ethos you have adopted for yourself is so weak that some random stranger that you've taken a liking to has to fix you? Why is that? And what makes you think they can? What makes you think they can? Oh yes, Double A, you've opened a big can of worms, because I'm very opinionated on this particular topic. Because it ties in a lot with when you look at stories and you look at the relationship between characters. It ties in a lot with how the characters interact. It's always very interesting to see what the writer believes about certain things, and the message that they preach, and the things that they view as good, and the things that they determine as a happy ending between certain characters. It's very interesting and it's very curious. And it's almost very interesting because when you look at that writer's own life, there's always some discrepancy. Or when you look at the popular messaging in culture about how relationships should work, it's always very different to the fairy tale. So it's very interesting for me whenever I look at that. And I think it's very damaging when we believe that another person is supposed to heal something in us, because then we come at relationships very wrongly. We come at relationships from a point that disadvantages the whole relationship. You know, there is a good thing to be said about having community around you. There is something to be said about influence. There is something to be said about how having good friends around you and good people around you can provoke certain things. But if you yourself do not change and do the work and do what needs to be done to take accountability for how your life is going and how your actions impact you and everyone else around you, you will quickly fall out with every single person in that group and be left alone. And that's why there's a loneliness pandemic, is because we think it's other people's jobs to fix us and not our job. That's literally what Jordan Peterson is getting at when he says make your bed. Like, take responsibility for your life. Take responsibility for the things that you need to do. And internal work, healing, is a personal thing. It is something you need to do. It's not somebody else's job. There's no job title that comes with healing you. Insert your name in the you. Okay. So Squidbear asked, that was a very long tangent, by the way, guys. And I wasn't yelling at anyone. I was just making a point, because I think it's so important to talk about, because this, and you will be surprised how often it crops up in stories and how bad it makes stories and how unbelievable it makes stories. and how unenjoyable sometimes it makes stories. Because when you have these ideas in your head, not only do they affirm a terrible view, but they also make for unbelievable stories because we know it doesn't work that way. Otherwise there would be no separation. Otherwise people would actually change. There would be no abuse. If just having a good person in your life was enough, if somebody else could change you, there would be no abuse because everybody would be changed by the good person. There would be no verse in the Bible that said, how can two walk together unless they be agreed? There would be no verse that says bad morals corrupts good company because the good company would trump. But no, bad morals corrupts good company. Meaning, if you are bad, there is no good influence that can make you good unless you make a decision, unless you change your mind, unless you have a new heart, unless you're renewed. Otherwise, there is no good influence that can make you change. Until you make the decision to change and do the work it takes, nobody can beat your addictions for you. Otherwise, just getting around the right people will just make your addictions disappear, but they don't. You still have that secret addiction. You still are going through that secret thing that nobody knows about. You're still doing that thing you know you're not supposed to. You still got that vice despite the good company because it's you. You need to change. So at the end of the day, it's like, it's important to talk about because with our characters as well, there is no amount of good like surrounding information that makes them a good person. Your character's internal world needs to be evident to the reader. Otherwise, this is just somebody we never get close to. So it's good food for thought, both for real life and also for stories. Because when you're writing characters, who is this character really? What's their ethos saying? What are their actions saying about their ethos? What are their actions saying about the strength of their ethos? People seem obsessed with quick fixes, hence you're criticizing. It's true. It's easy to be like, well, it's she can change me or he can change me. No, they can't. No, they can't. They don't have the tools equipped. They do not come equipped with those tools, and so you will bounce from person to person, or your characters will bounce from different circumstances unchanged. Have you ever read stories that are like this? Is very typical of badly written stories. A character will go through a certain set of circumstances and remain completely unchanged by the end of it. As in, they will have gone through the most harrowing set of circumstances, and by the end, there is no visible change from beginning to end. This character is the same person that they were at the beginning, as if nothing had happened. That's the same thing in real life, where if the character does not decide to change, you end up going through the same problems over and over again, becoming the common denominator in all the problems and thinking the world is against you, everybody's against you. But no, the person who needs to change is your character or you. So it's food for thought. That's a little bit of like real life coming out of literature. In Beauty and the Beast, doesn't Belle help the Beast become good again? No, he doesn't. Not in the original story. In the Disney story, which has a lot of um, archetypal faults, should I say? Yeah, she helps. She trains him to become good again. But in the real story, the Beast is already a good person. He's already a good person, and he's actually been wronged. And what Belle does is discover that he's a good person who has been wronged. So she doesn't change him. She doesn't civilize him. She doesn't tame him. He is a tame person on his own. Because you don't need somebody else to come and tell you right from wrong. You don't need somebody else to come and tell you to be polite. The only people who need to tell you that is your parents when you were a child. After a certain age, it is an expectation because it is civilized behavior. In order to live in a society out of it, in order to live with other people, you need to be polite. In order to live with other people, you need to know how to be kind. In order to live with other people, you need to share. Otherwise, other people will isolate you and you will be lonely because nobody wants to be around somebody who cannot share. So what Belle discovers in the original Grimm's Brothers tale is that the beast is already a kind, generous, civilized person, meaning he can get on with other people. She discovers this and ignores the lies of the bad fairy and the lies of the townspeople. And she discovers, no, this is a good person whose reputation has been damaged. And what she does is simply tell everybody that, no, he's a good person. Look for yourselves. And they too see that he has been wronged. Double A, Belle by circumstances managed to make the beast a man again, not by ordained fate. And yes, Belle did not ask to be imprisoned. She volunteered to be imprisoned in place of her father. So Callum asks, what if biological parents were severely wrong about something? People would then unwittingly find other parental figures. Self-reflection, interpretation of Beauty and the Beast. Okay. So in the case of, and this is why I mentioned the word community, because when you're young, and this, let's talk about this in a way that maybe everyone will be able to understand. Let's look at Frodo, for example. When Frodo was young, growing up around a lot of people who weren't necessarily looking after him in the way that his parents would, because his parents had drowned. When Frodo was young, his parents drowned. And he was raised in Brandy Hall with a lot of relations. You can imagine there's lots of kids, there's lots of adults doing a bunch of, one in particular is really looking at Frodo and making sure that he's on the straight and narrow. And so he was one of the worst young rascals to come out of Buckland, according to Farmer Maggot. But as soon as Frodo adapts, because remember, people are adaptable. So when he is living amongst the Brandybuck relations, he works, or he behaves in one way. He behaves in a way that's typical of the young hobbits living in Brandy Hall, and that's why they have that reputation. But when he moves to Hobbiton, he behaves in another way, because now the community has certain expectations of how to behave to work within this community. So there are certain rules, and people are not brick walls. We observe certain behavior. It's like when you walk into a library, no one really needs to tell you that you need to be quiet because it's quiet. And so you see people moving around, but it's quiet. You see that the library has people in it, but it's quiet. So the assumption is that you should be quiet. No one needs to teach you that. And so the same thing happens in society. When you move into a new area, you realize that, oh, there's a way that people do things here. There's a way that people behave in this particular section. Like in a hospital, there's a way that we behave. In a school, there's a way that we behave. We can be louder. We can have more fun. We can do more things. The playground is like, okay, now that we're outside of the walls of confinement, that is the classroom, we can shout. But in the classroom, it's like, okay, yeah, we can talk, but we can't really shout because there's an adult there, and adults are meant to bring some kind of order, and so we can't really be shouting in the classroom. So there's a way to behave here. Humans are constantly learning, and so if you are living in a community, the way that the community behaves will tell you certain things about how to behave. And so even without your biological parents being around, you're going to remain a sponge. You're going to pick up things. You're going to realize that, okay, in a certain area, they behave in this way. In a certain circumstance, we behave in this way. In a different setting, we behave in this way. And that's how humans are. So yes, it's a little bit more difficult if you didn't have parents who were there to teach you these things, but you will pick them up because you live in a society with people around. You will pick up the general gist of how people behave. That's why people who even have autism, they learn how to mask. Masking is just pretending to be like everyone else. So and why? is masking even possible? Because there is a certain set of behaviors that apply to certain sets of circumstances. So it's possible to learn these things. It's possible to learn things that your parents didn't inherit, like teach you, just because you live around other people. What do you think of Shrek's take on Beauty and the Beast? I can't even remember Shrek's take on Beauty and the Beast, so I can't even comment. Do you believe with Anton's ego quote, not everyone can become a great artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere? Yes, I believe that. Callum says, I was going to say Frodo sounds autistic by your description. Well, I wouldn't say that. You know, there's a lot more that goes into an autism diagnosis than what I've just said. Masking is definitely a symptom of autism, but you know, there's a lot more that goes into a diagnosis. There are people who literally go to school to study how to give those kind of diagnoses. So I wouldn't be able to give one right now. But yeah, guys, I'm gonna make a last point on the original sort of thing I opened with on this live. Before I close, because it is 9:30, so, and this live has been going on for 2-ish hours now. An hour and a bit. An hour and a bit. I feel like it's been an hour and a bit. So yeah, like I was saying in the beginning, we were just kind of, I'm just going to do a brief recap because I don't have much to say on this, much else to say on this topic. But yeah, writing characters of the opposite gender, it's not that difficult if you remember that all humans, like we were just saying now, there's a certain set of behaviors that are common amongst everybody. So stick to what a normal human person would do generally in a given circumstance, and you won't have your female characters behaving weirdly when they didn't need to behave that way. Like there's none of this, oh, women behave this way and so I'm gonna have my character do this. Don't do that. Generally, humans have a set of behaviors. Learn what those are and use them as your basis. The second thing is that people are shaped more by circumstances than they are by their biology. If your character is growing up in a certain set of circumstances, use that set of circumstances to determine their actions and not the gender that they happen to be. And the last thing is your female characters and your male characters are allowed to have emotions. Men can cry. Jesus wept. It's the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. And your female characters don't have to be crying every 2 minutes. Like your female characters can have a brain, they can think, and your male characters can have emotions. It's not taboo, and it's not illegal, and it won't make your story trash. In fact, the absence of these normal reactions to things will actually make your story trash. So those are the 3 general rules to remember when writing characters of the opposite gender. Circumstance, who is your character as a person? That will shape them more than their gender. Forget their gender. Who are they as a person? Their gender should just add a little bit of nuance to how they react to certain things, but not so much that we go, oh, the men have written women again, or the women have written men again. We shouldn't be able to tell so obviously like who wrote what gender. So yeah, that was how I started the live, and that's how I'm gonna end it. I'm just gonna go over some of the comments before I leave, because I can hear my family downstairs and they're getting loud, which means they want to go to bed. Callum says, I think Squid Bear meant, what do you think of Shrek as another Beauty and the Beast? I think Shrek and Fiona You know what? I'm gonna leave this till the next video because I think this particular topic, we need a good deep dive into it. So for the next live, we're gonna look into relationships. Yeah, we'll go in there. So for the next live, we're gonna talk about relationships, and we will start with Shrek and Fiona, and then we'll go into other characters as well and talk about relationships and talk about archetypes, stories, and lastly, what to leave in the realm of books and what never to take into real life. Because there's this really funny thing on social media where you'll see women say that um they will name things in books um that they find really attractive, that if anyone dared to do in real life, they would immediately call the police. So I think that's such an accurate thing to say, because certain things are nice to tidy up a book because it's fiction, it's fantasy. But in real life, ew, brother, like, so just we'll talk about it in the next live. The next live will be on Monday. On Monday. We'll do a live on Monday. And it'll be Monday evening, 8 my time, 8 p.m. my time. I will do a premiere before that so that just everybody's kind of aware of generally when I'm coming on. Callum says, come on, Malaika's family, have a sleepover party. That's not possible. My dad does not believe in sleepovers. With good reason too. I watch so many true crime stuff that I now no longer believe in sleepovers. So yeah, we will like okay. Double A says, can you answer my question before you leave? Okay, I'll scroll up and see. Does Scooby-Doo have anything worthy of being taught in English literature classes? Scooby-Doo. No. No. Scooby-Doo doesn't have anything of real worth to be taught in an English literature class, except how to successfully take a very kind of silly idea and spin it into a very successful series that can run for literal decades. If we're maybe at uni level, where we talk about digital publishing and where we talk about publishing in general, and we talk about the staying power of certain stories, then Scooby-Doo could be taught in an English literature class. But if I had to take your examples, which is like the archetypal stuff and things like that, then no, just because and I can see your comments where you're like, oh, Fred the leader, Velma the geek, Shaggy the lanky athlete, and all that stuff, and Scooby being the foil for Shaggy, and Shaggy's the embodiment of hubris. There are so many better examples of books that could be used to illustrate those points than Scooby-Doo. So no, it just wouldn't be picked, because remember, there are so many books and they go through a vetting process before they are given to schools and before they're put onto the school syllabus, or they're put onto the mark scheme. Scooby-Doo is not making the cut. So yeah, that is why it just wouldn't make the cut. And yeah, you can say my opinion, but the fact that it hasn't made the cut means it's also the opinion of the examiners. So it's not just my opinion. But yeah, I mean, to each their own. So yeah, no, Scooby-Doo wouldn't count as an example, especially when there are so much better examples of those same points to be illustrated. But yeah, I'm gonna end the live stream now. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you tune into the next one, because Double A has definitely given us the topic for the next one. So thank you, Double A, for that. Thanks, mate. And yeah, I hope you guys have a nice evening. I am definitely exhausted. I've been talking for ages and I haven't had a sip of water. Next time I'll probably bring a glass of water. But thank you so much, guys, for watching. I hope you have a lovely evening. This has been the Malaika Writes channel. No, I'm not Australian.